Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building your own business with the people doing it. I'm your host and fellow business builder, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into some good, honest, small business chat. Hello, listener, and thank you for hitting play on this pod, for getting around the journey of small business owners, and for being one or an aspiring one yourself. If you've listened to Unemployed and Afraid for a little bit, you'll know that I left my corporate career, which was in radio advertising / branded content creation and sales, back in 2020, pre-pandemic. Excellent timing, as always, Kim. I left with nothing to go to because I was desperate for some headspace to figure out what else I could or should be doing with my life. All I knew was that my entire identity was wrapped up in what I did, and that eventually I wanted to work for myself, which wasn't going to happen where I was. What came next can only be described as a personal and professional unraveling, but what's emerged, or who has emerged, is someone I never would have met if I hadn't given it the time. She's an entrepreneur and I'm damn proud of her, although I'm very much still figuring out this small business life. Leaving any long-term career and entering entrepreneurship is, well, pretty damn scary, but there's one thing that can feel scarier, and it's the thought of never trying. My guest today is Leigh Kuhlmann, the man behind the chili oil of DC Cartel, and he was in the same industry as me, so you know I'm going to feel his pain. But the lesson he's about to share makes sense for any major change and to the building of any kind of business. We chat about recognizing when you've lost the love for what it is you're doing, rebuilding your sense of self after leaving what it was that you did, building a brand with personality, taking a bet on a business idea with a bit of a why not approach, the head noise of self-doubt that can sometimes get in the way, and pushing forward after getting off to a false start. If you need a little bit of inspo to keep going on the path you're building for yourself, you are in the right spot, my friend. Let's get into it. I'm here with Leigh Kuhlmann, founder / head hombre of DC Cartel, which is Australia's only slow-cooked crispy chili oil. Not just an amazing product, but a brilliant brand, demonstrated by this little gem of information I lifted off their website. DC Cartel is named after Leigh's Nana Dulcie, and is handmade from 40-year-old recipes first established in the Adelaide Hills. Basically, if you like garlic, onion, and chili, then this is the addictive kick in the mouth you have been waiting for. Once you have had the original 1983, everything else just tastes it was made in 2023. The recipe is as close to authentic as the first day they were made. The only thing that would make them more 80s is if you were popping monos on your BMX, eating white nights and wagon wheels, while listening to a hot new band out of New Jersey called Bon Jovi. But you're not, unless you are, and that is a massive coincidence. I think you can see where I'm going here with a very cool brand. Since its launch not very long ago at all, DC Cartel has landed third spot at the Mr. Chili Awards Australia New Zealand as Best of the Best Crispy Chili Oil, and number one spot in the same awards as Best of the Best Chili Flake and Oil. The business of chili oil is clearly very hot stuff. I can't wait to hear your story of building this brand. Leigh, welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thanks for having me. That was a massive intro, so I appreciate it. Quite overwhelming.
Anytime I get to talk about monos and white nights in an intro, like I'm here for it.
I know you must have them lining up, the old monos and white nights, so yeah.
No, it's an era I can get right around. I'm telling you, 90s is making a comeback now, and 80s is right behind it. It's a good time.
Yeah, exactly. That's half the reason I did it, because I was like, it's actually uber cool at the moment. So yeah, hopefully it doesn't go out of style for the next 10, 15 years and I can make some money out of it. So
no, I think it's here to stay. So before we get into the good stuff, I would love to know how your best friend would describe you.
How would they describe me? Probably chaotic, a little bit unhinged, unemployable, all those good words like that, but probably pretty loyal, a fairly good listener, and don't mind a drink here and there. And I love my dogs. So they're the two big ones, drinking and dogs.
How many dogs do you have?
Yeah, so we got 2 golden retrievers, which are, 8 months and 13 months. So our house is super chaotic at the moment. Yeah, the second one was a little bit unplanned. So this is running every night by the seat of our pants, trying to keep them under control. And when you think you've got it, they just do something like dig a hole in the carpet, so it all unwinds from there. So it's definitely a vibe at our house at the moment. So lots of hair everywhere too.
Oh, I love it. It sounds like a good time. Now, before DC Cartel was a real incredible product that you could hold in your hand, and as a fellow Adelaide person in this question, we can go back as far as you can. We can go back to Cafe Paradiso era if you like.
Whoa, you have done some research.
I have. Before DC Cartel, who were you?
Yeah, so we grew up in the Adelaide Hills, split parents, and I would suggest I was probably pretty lost. I wasn't great at school, had shining moments here and there, but wasn't a great student. I'm pretty sure if you tested me today and I was a kid today, I probably had something like ADHD or one of those things like difficulty learning. Like some subjects I would blitz, and then the next year I'd get into another class and I would just fail. Yeah, there was really no pattern to it, and I repeated year 12, or as you call it in Adelaide, year 13. Which, when you say year 13, everyone's like, is there an extra year in Adelaide? It's, you do if you got the results I did in year 12. I was that bad. And ended up doing year 12, got into architecture for a year and sort of liked it, but really hated it. It just was too much detail. The last thing I am good at is detail. Like in this business, I look after all the fun and game stuff, and my partner looks after all the money. I have no idea how much money we got in the accounts or anything like that. Any of the details she looks after. So, I got into architecture and just really, I scraped through it. Like I passed pretty much the first year, but it was a 5-year course, and I was working at a cafe at the same time, just having a lot of fun. And there was a dude working there who was working at Triple M as well. And I spoke to him. I said, "Oh man, I'd love to do it." It was like handing out the icy cold cans of Coke. It just seemed like so much fun driving around, hitting beaches on weekends and giving out movie tickets. And he said, "You're about the only guy I know who could carry it off with your personality." And so got me an interview. I nailed it, I hope, but I got the job. It was like, I still remember, it was like $13 an hour I was getting paid because it was such a sought after role. Yeah, started doing that, loved it, and just dropped out of architecture. Yeah. And when I told my old man, he's like, "Mate," he said, honestly, he said, he will deny this to this day, but he said to me, "Mate, there's no future in radio." He said, "You need to buckle down, get back to uni." Yeah, so I dropped out of architecture, went against what Dad wanted, and started doing Triple M and Triple M Adelaide and driving around with the icy cold cans of Coke. And I basically, when I was there, said yes to everything. So they would say, "Can you do this, or do you want to learn how to do it?" I'd be like, "Yep." And I, in the end, after I left, was doing everything from driving double-decker buses to setting up technical equipment to paneling, so you're behind the desk. And so literally, when I left there, I could do everything. And I still pretty much hold the record, I believe, as the only casual to ever get sacked from Triple M Adelaide. So they asked me to leave and they paid me out too. I got a meeting with the GM and she said, "Look, we're going to let you go," which they probably didn't have to, but I'd been there for about 4 years, and they said, "We're going to let you go." And I said, "Oh." And she goes, "How does that leave you?" And I said, "How do you think it leaves me? Like, this is my job." And I said, "Financially crippled." And she said, "Yeah, we thought so." And they gave me $2,000. So I knew there was something going on. I had a bit of a run-in with the content director at the time. And so, I left and was unemployed and afraid. And I literally was thinking, what do I do? And I was going out with a girl at the time and got a job in country radio and started my on-air career. And that's how that all kicked off, and it just rolled. Literally, radio rolled from there, to be honest with you. So, yeah.
It can very quickly chew up a big chunk of your life, industries like that, or any industry really, when you start following the path and saying yes to things. How long did that path last for you?
It's literally been 25 years. Like, it's been so consuming of my life, radio has. I have a love of radio. That's so deep, it's not funny. Like, I got that job in Cooma and was like, within 6 months was on the breakfast show and running the station, and just thought that I was the greatest thing ever. I was at a station called Snow FM, and then I got a call from Triple M Sydney at the time, and they said, "Look, we'd love you to come down and apply for the mid-dawn role." And I went down there and met with one of the biggest names in radio. It's like this God guy, and I went down there and had the weirdest interview, I would suggest, ever in my life. And I left, and someone said, "How'd the interview go?" And I said, "I actually don't know, man." Like I said, I don't know if I got the job. It was an hour of my life where I just was in this cloud of just floating around, because he was asking the weirdest questions and just trying to see who I was in hindsight. And they rang me up about a week later and said, "Mate, got the job. Love you to come. You're on air from 12 at night till 6 in the morning." And I'm like, cool. Yeah, left Cooma, went down there and worked my way through to music director of Triple M Sydney, and then went down to Melbourne, got sacked was music director from Triple M Sydney, but they'd pushed me down to Melbourne as music director down there and was doing a little bit of on air, and then was there for about 3 years, I think it was, got sacked from there. You'll notice this is a pretty good theme. I ended up getting picked up by Nova, which was probably one of the greatest things that ever happened. Nova was just launched. It was just such a new brand. And you'll notice if you check out the website of DC Cartel and you check out the Instagram and all that sort of stuff, there's a lot of similar brand values that I carried through from Nova into that, which is just to be different. It was all about just getting noticed by zigging when everyone else zagged, sticking out, like making noise, being controversial, like punching up, what we used to call, which was like you never punch down to someone, if that makes sense. I loved my time at Nova. It was such a whirlwind. I was in it for probably around 6 years and started off as music director in Perth. Within 6 months was in Brisbane, working at the next job up from there. And 6 months later from there, I was literally back in Perth running a radio station at the age of 26, I think. I was like, it was so wild, honestly. It was definitely the biggest learning curve. And I got to the point where I just couldn't make it work, like ratings-wise. It was a real slump. It was, to put it mildly, it was during Hamish and Andy days where those guys were rating 20s at the back end of the day drive. And so that would always carry through. So the thought of radio is if you have people listening at the end of the day, they'll end up coming in at the breakfast show. And so our station was going backwards, probably not for anything we did, that more just Hamish and Andy was just so big. And yeah, and I ended up deciding to quit. And I went in to quit, and my partner, now my wife, said to me, why don't you just hold? She said, I've got a job interview today. And she said, and they want me really badly, but I won't find out till Monday. And I said, yeah, no worries. So I went in and I was going to hold off, and I was in there on the day I was going to quit. And all of a sudden my big boss rolled in from Sydney, and I'm like, oh, g'day, mate, how are you? And he's like, yeah, good. He said, you got a sec? I said, yeah. And I went into the boardroom, and there's my other big boss up on the screen and my general manager. And I was like, oh, shit, I'm about to get fired. And again, yeah. And so literally we parted ways really amicably in the end, because I was just so super unhappy. I just didn't enjoy it anymore. It was like I was so burnt out. Radio is such a great industry, but it definitely takes its toll on you. And I think by that time I was 30 and had a couple of knocks and was probably drinking way too much, to be honest with you. Like, yeah, back to Melbourne, and I took a couple of months off and ended up getting back into radio. I went to start a business, actually, which was my first shot at starting a brand new business. And I was working with bands and a record mate and sitting with bands and trying to get them, not radio airplay, but trying to get them successful and mainstream in a different way that hadn't been done before. And a job came along down at K-Rock, and it was just too good. And like they wanted something which basically I had done at Nova. They said to me, I used to do all the writing for the station. So they said, we want a new personality for the brand. Again, that Nova style personality. They said, we want a content director and we want someone on air. And I was like, yeah. And I went for it, and I got some good money from them. And I said, look, I'll be here for 12 months. And then I'm going to try and get a job back in Metro. I was really honest with them, and I was there 7 years. And I still to this day, the best job I ever had. Like, we created this radio station with just like-minded people that just wanted to be there. We supported each other. We were creating radio that Metro Radio would look at, even though we're a regional station, and steal ideas from. And I was getting calls probably after about 3 years, once we started getting the station up and running really hard, of people saying to me, love to get you in Metro, love to get you in Metro. And I was like, you know what? I'm having so much fun here. And the right job had never come along. And it was just, yeah, we were just creating stuff. I still look back on it as the best time in my life. Creatively, I was at my peak from a leader's point of view. I was just creating great people who were then going on to Metro Radio, which was part of what I sort of wanted. I always wanted, because I had a couple of leaders in the first part of my career who said, you'll never make it, you're not good enough. And I really used the bitterness of that experience of saying, I will make it. And when I get there, I'm going to make sure that I don't do the same for those people. Because like a manager saying to you those words, it stuck with me for years. It still sticks with me, and it drives me to be better. And so I really took a lot of guys under my wing, as I did it when I was at Nova. So yeah, K-Rock was such a great time. It was just this window of probably 5 years of my life that was just the best. And then after that, the big Metro station, Triple M, came calling, and I'd knocked them back a couple of times. And in the end, they threw me a job which I thought was going to be great. And I took the plunge, and we moved to Sydney. I was there for 5 years in the end. It was interesting, probably the word that I would use it. It was a lot of ups and downs, and I learnt a lot about myself, and I discovered what anxiety was. Pretty much. So, yeah, it was one of those moments in your career where, yeah, I went there with the highest expectations, and I was at the peak of my creative managerial powers, and I left in the end a shell of who I am, and spent the last year trying to regain my confidence and regain everything, to be honest with you. And don't get me wrong, I had great times. I worked with some really great teams. I started Kennedy Malloy down in Melbourne, and that was amazing, like a national show. And that was always going to be part-time, not part-time, small. That was always going to be 10 weeks. But then I worked with the Radio Chaser boys, so the Chaser guys, who, again, I love writing. I love comedy. I love all that clever humour. Those guys were so great to work with, and they're so generous as entertainers. Yeah, it was so amazing. Honestly, that was probably the highlight. And then they got moved on. And so, yeah, I was at a bit of a loose end for a couple of years through COVID, jumping between starting podcasts for the company, like The Briefing with a couple of other people and that sort of stuff. And, yeah, in the end, it just got to the point where I would come home and my partner used to say, "You're so unhappy." And I'm like, "Yep." And my partner begged me to leave, and then COVID hit. And I said, "Let's get through COVID and we'll see where we sit." And we got through that. And there was, don't get me wrong, good days and bad days. But she used to say to me, it was probably with about 6 months ago, she said, "We're out of COVID." She said, "Do you like your job?" And I said, "No, I don't. I'm not enjoying it. It's not fun." And when I left K-Rock, which was the best job I ever had, I said, if the day comes that I'm not enjoying it, I'm just going to quit. And I didn't stay true to myself with that. I turned into someone that I wasn't happy with. I didn't like that person. And she said that the biggest thing that rang true with me, she said, "Can you see yourself enjoying this job at any point?" And I sat and thought about it. And I said, "No." And I remember thinking, "You're 45, mate. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're in a job that you hate." And someone described it as the golden handcuffs. The money was amazing. I was probably overpaid, to be honest with you. I was definitely, if you chat to them about that, I was overpaid for what I was doing. But yeah, and I decided to just throw it in and move back to Melbourne to renovate the house. And it was one of those things that, again, like I said, when I left, it wasn't one thing, it was 100 things. And I just felt like morally, I didn't want to be there anymore. It wasn't making me happy. I'd spent all my money on stuff that I wanted, bought a new car, bought too many pairs of Air Jordans that I care to deal with. And in the end, Sydney was a really interesting time. In the last year and a half, we had a lot of stuff externally happen from work. We had an incident over the road that we were just thrust into and involved in, which was essentially attempted murder. And we got thrust into that. We had our dog die. We just had my partner go through skin cancer. And so, yeah, it got to the point where I just realized there's more to life. I'm like, this is not me. And all the money in the world isn't going to fix this. And so we quit. I quit. And Penny got a transfer back to Melbourne and to renovate the house. And instead I bought 3,000 empty jars from China and thought, let's see if we can't fill them with chili oil and make this a business. And here we are.
Oh, I mean, there's a lot about your story. I think that so many people can relate to finding yourself in something that should make you happy for a lot of reasons, but doesn't. And trying to be able to find the answer as to why and the clear direction of the next step when you're in the middle of something that doesn't make you happy is a huge challenge. So my proverbial hat is off to you for making any kind of a change, because I think sometimes that's the very thing, just taking yourself into a new headspace is the very thing that can propel you towards the other thing that's calling out for you and calling out for your attention. So I understand.
One of the things is as well is, like, I never suffered badly from mental health, and I just got to the point where there were times there where I'm like, it was so dark, and I'm like, not that dark, but it was dark, and I'm like, what am I doing? And everything that used to pull me out of it, which was exercise, like I loved going to the gym, just didn't work anymore. And I remember just thinking, and the anxiety of going to work, just like having this thing in my chest, which I didn't know what it was. I ended up saying to my partner one day, I don't know how to describe it. It's just, I feel like everything's just tingly and there's this thing in my chest. And she said, "That's anxiety." And I said, "Oh." Like, I didn't know. And I didn't know, like, mental health stuff, like depression, all that. And I was like, shit, this is getting serious. And like, it's all caused from the job for whatever reason. And at the end of the day, you've got to take responsibility. And I've got to take responsibility for some of the things that happen in that workplace, for me not standing up for it, for me not voicing it, for a lot of stuff, and also for sticking around it. So I don't blame them. It's just not an environment that I want to be in. And I think in the end, as anyone who's left an industry for so many years, I was devastated, to be honest with you. I was like 25 years in an industry and I knew it so well. I'd been at the peaks and I'd been at the peak of my powers, and I left essentially not. And that took a lot of time to regenerate. And I think I spent 3 months or 4 months just coming to terms with the fact that I probably didn't want to work in radio again. Yeah, and I always thought I'd go back. I just don't know if I will anymore. And I wanted to create something that I wanted to feel excited about. And I think that's where DC Cartel came from, was like I sat down and I essentially wrote, who do I want to work for? What does that look like? Or I create?
When we know we're ready for something else, we just have to be ready for something else. And you just got to get into it. And I can see so much of the irreverence of that kind of an industry and the desire to have a fun voice that makes people happy while doing something coming into DC Cartel. And I want to get us there because I think what you've been able to do already after a career of 25 years and then have a brand that's so tangible and so fun already is a huge feat. So you've got to give yourself some congratulations for that. Take me to the space where you're purchasing, I think you said 300 jars.
3,000.
Very good. Okay, it's a few more.
Yeah.
Take me to maybe then a few more weeks before that. How did chili oil start to become a business idea? And how did you get to the stage of ordering these jars?
Yeah, so it was really interesting because over COVID, I started making chili sauce. And a friend who actually started a brand new hot shop, I'll give him a shout out, called That Hot Sauce Shop in Manly. She was a record company rep, and she said, and Elle said to me, she said, "Oh, do you like hot sauce?" I said, "I love it, but I just don't know where to get it from." And she put me onto this place, and I ordered a bunch. And it's like, some of them were really great. And I thought, "Oh, this is awesome." Some of them were terrible, and they were like $30. And I'm like, I reckon I could make better. So I started making them. And then I got a present one Christmas of a hot sauce called Shit the Bed. And Shit the Bed is a really clever marketing idea. You buy it, and you buy it pretty much, if you've ever tried it, as a bit of a joke, and you hand it to people. But I discovered that these guys were selling millions of dollars a year of hot sauce on the back of the name Shit the Bed. And I'm like, imagine if you had a hot sauce called Shit the Bed. And it was actually a really, people came back to buy it because it was so nice. And so I started thinking off of that. Yeah, I created a brand. The first ideation of DC Cartel was actually a brand based off of my Nana as well, called Nana's Fucking Hot Sauce. And Nana's Fucking Hot Sauce would have all these different labeled sort of hot sauces like Satan's Anus. I've got the dumbest ones, honestly. They're written, I've got a book full of the colon punch and all these ones where people would buy them. They'd be like, this is funny, buy it as a joke, eat it, and then go, this is awesome, I'm going to go back and rebuy it. That's how it started. And so when I left Triple M and I moved back here, I was pretty much on the thought I was going to make oil because oil was just easy to make. And I nailed a bit of a recipe down and all the rest. And it was loosely based off of my Nana and her work when she used to own pubs in the Adelaide Hills. Yeah, and so I retweaked one of her recipes up. And I decided with the Nana's Fucking Hot Sauce, it was probably not going to sit on shelves. And in my mind, when I wrote up the things that I wanted to be and what I didn't want to be, I wanted to be in certain stores. And I wrote down 3 certain stores that I wanted to be in. And I realized that they were boutique delicatessens. And they would not put it on. Even though the jar would look super slick and would look really nice, they wouldn't put it in their store. And so I started to change it a bit. And in the end, I remember it because we were up in Dalesford taking a bit of a break, like I needed a break because I just had 6 months off. And I said to my partner, I said, what about we call it DC Cartel, Dulce's Chili Cartel? And I like it. It started off as Nana's Chili Cartel. So NC Cartel, I couldn't get the name. And so I changed it to DC Cartel. And that's where it started. And I got a designer and he designed a little logo. So we were down the track a bit and I said to my partner, I'm going to order some jars. And she said, how many? I said, I'll get 1,000 because it's enough. And she goes, get 3,000 because then you've got to do it. Like you've got to legit do it. And she said, in worst case, babe, we lose $5,000. So yeah, I ordered 3,000 jars from China, empty jars, learnt so much, got a food license, hired a commercial kitchen. And I'd done a little bit of work in a cafe for 5-6 years, like you said, back in Adelaide, and started making it. And the funniest thing is I made so many mistakes. The jars came in from China and I thought the port's literally about 500 metres up the road from our house. And I thought, I'll go pick them up the trailer. I'd get there and they said, so, the tax and duty, that's an extra $1,500. And I'm like, I just started making financial mistakes and like going with my hat in my hand. Again, I'm not the detail guy. Penny looks after all the money. And so the very first batch rolled off around November. To be honest, it was probably October in the last year. And I completely muffed it up. I made 200 jars of a sauce that's almost inedible or an oil that's inedible. And I put them out in my garage out the back here and they've stayed there. And no one, by the way, had ever tried this chili oil before I was ready to release it. So it was really bizarre because my partner doesn't eat chili oil and I didn't want to share it with my friends because talk about the head noise. I know you've had a couple of guys on talking about head noise, and I had enough head noise going on from leaving a career of 25 years. And I didn't want someone getting in my head to say, hey, this is shit. And because I didn't want to hear that. I already had enough self-doubt. And anyone who's ever thrown in a career to start a new business, I would wake up at 3 a.m. thinking, mate, what are you doing? You don't know anything about like chili oil, sauces or marketing or branding or what the hell? What are you doing? And I would spend hours like laying in bed thinking about the head noise of what am I doing? That's only started to stop in the last couple of months, but I still have self-doubt. What am I doing? Honestly, but it's working. So let's just roll with it and see what happens. So nothing ventured, nothing gained. Yeah. So I literally made 200 jars, which sat in my shed. And I had a mate come around. I said, let's bust one open because he gets stuff on supermarket shelves. That's his whole job. And we opened it up. We tried it. And as soon as I tasted it, I said, don't eat it. And he said, why not? I said, there's something wrong. And I knew exactly what had happened because I'd never made more than 5 jars. So I'd stuffed up the recipe and I was like, oh, shit. And that took me about 2 weeks to recover from this 200 jars. I started emptying and it was soul destroying because I'd invested everything I'd ever done. I hadn't worked this hard on anything for a long time. And so it was very bizarre. That was essentially how it started, the jars and all the rest. But the brand itself is a completely different sort of beast because I knew a lot of stuff about marketing and branding from working in radio for 25 years. And I knew what I wanted to be and what I didn't want to be. And I loved the Nova brand and I loved being different. And I loved all these other brands. And one of the things I realized about them, like the Young Henrys and these sort of brands and the Hawks Brewing and in particular, the pub that they have, the Social Club in Marrickville, is like it's just different. It gets talked about because it's cool and it's different. And I wanted to create a brand that in the end, it didn't matter if it didn't make a lot of money. It had to probably fund me somehow, fund us, because there would have been questions raised from Penny. But it just had to, be something that I was proud of. And if I was proud of it, my mates had a laugh about the stuff on social media, then I was hoping someone else would have a laugh. And going back to the shit the bed story, if it tasted okay, then hopefully it was going to be okay. And like I said, no one had tasted it before I started selling. So it was definitely a massive leap of faith, that whole part of it. So yeah, been an interesting little start, that's for sure. So
yeah, it's a really pivotal time, I think, when you're about to put something out into the ether and the potentiality of well-meaning friends and family to say just one small thing that can set you so far backwards, be it should you invest that much to get started? I'm not sure it's exactly where it needs, because they want to see you do well. Often this feedback comes through. They want you to be safe because they care about you, but also because sometimes it's a reflection of perhaps something that's not being self-fulfilled in that space as well, when people bring you down a bit of a peg. And it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about and talking to people on this podcast about, is friends and family at that time of starting a business can be some of your worst people to bring into your sphere. It almost has to be just other people who have gone in and done something and fucked it up a bunch of times and then gone really well. And then someone who's gone through the experience of starting a business to be able to say to you, that's all right, let's just give this a go. Just put this out there. It's an MVP. It's a minimum viable product. Let's get it out there, give it a go, take some learnings from it. That is the most important thing that you need in your corner at that time. So I understand the nervousness about sharing it with people because it's scary.
Well, I had a mate who was launching a No Out beer at the time, and he was really the instigator because he was working with the designer. And I said, maybe I just get this thing designed up and let's invest $4,000 and get a designer to do it, get the bottles, and just see what it looks like. And yeah, but again, like the head noise of people having their say, people telling you, mate, I want to do that. And I'm like, mate, what do you know? You work in banking. You don't know anything about design or branding. Or all these people telling you, and you're right, they mean well, but the reality is I just backed myself in. And I will say this is I could not have done this without my partner. Like she financially did it. The days where I was so dark and she knew it, she'd just say, just keep going. Like we're in it now. And I think every day I'll just try to put one foot forward. And then all of a sudden I think I just turned around and was like, oh shit, I'm actually a fair way down the track. Like when the jars arrived and we launched the website, we started selling and you're right. Like they do mean well. People mean well. And I've probably done that before and I've probably said stuff. And again, it goes back to my early career when that person was saying, you don't have what it takes. I never wanted to be that. And so therefore, yeah, I just shut those people out. And I read an interesting book which said you take on board some of the stuff they say, but in the end, you just got to do what you think's right. And I literally did. And back on Penny, she's very good at numbers. She works in travel and expense. And so she's very great with numbers, and she knows that her thing's not marketing and branding. And so I've done some really dumb things and got stickers made up that look like cocaine bags and stuff like this. And they've been expensive, and she's never questioned it. She's just gone, you know what, babe, you know what you're doing, just do it. And I'm like, yeah. And I sometimes, with the really dumb shit, I just don't tell her that I'm going to do it. And I just pop up and go, look at these stickers that look like cocaine bags, babe. What do you think? And she's like, how many have you ordered? It's 200. And she's like, they're here now. So what say do I have in it? Yeah.
You got to have a little bit of fun with your branding and your marketing. It's actually the thing that I'm most excited to do as my own brand grows in Unemployed and Afraid, because I got a lot of fun ideas and I'm like, they just need a little bit of marketing stretch in terms of financials to be able to make this happen. Because I think you've got to have a bit of fun with it. You've got to really love your brand tone. And Leigh, you and I were talking about this before we hit record, that authenticity in a brand tone is just so incredibly important. And I'm learning this the more business owners I connect with. It's a brand and a product needs to have its own personality to be able to be recognized by consumers. But when you're a solopreneur, a small team, a family team, in particular, you have to be so connected to that brand and to be able to live and breathe it and come up with the ideas. And I'm a big believer in that. It has to be authentic to you and to who you are. I think that's incredibly important. How have you put yourself into the brand in terms of your tone? How have you managed that?
Yeah. So back on the Nova thing, and that was one of their big things was that like they just were, like, it was all about just being real. I think their brand value was just be real, and I really identified with that. I'm not saying that Triple M wasn't, and I really identified with that. And so when I actually wrote down brand values for mine, that was one of them. And so when I started it, I wanted to be exactly who I was. Like when you start to lie and you start to make up untruths, you'll get caught. And people can see through it. People can sniff bullshit from a mile away. So if you're not true to your brand, or if you're half-assed about it, they'll pick it. They won't buy it. And so when I started the DC Cartel brand, so I said before we started as Dulce's Chilli Cartel, and then the backstory of Nana owning pubs in the Adelaide Hills, and so we used to come from a bit of a pub family, and Nana used to cook with chili in the pub. So I tweaked up one of those recipes. And I thought everyone's got a Nana. So the cool thing with the Nana was like they identified with this thing. It's a 40-year-old recipe. I tried to, as part of my brand values, do exactly what everyone else wasn't doing. So when they were over here doing real reviews of this is the best chili oil I've ever had, I was doing fake reviews saying this is like chili cocaine, and having photos of 80s guys snorting chili oil off a bench saying something like, it really stings the nostrils or something like that. So it was like we were over here, they were over here, and they were doing real tasting stuff. Like they were doing, here's us cooking with all this food. I do Chico rolls because it was more relatable. So yeah, it was all about being real. As the brand developed, we had the Nana and the 40-year-old recipe and the original 1983, and the link in with that is literally they sold all the pubs in the 80s. So that I like that it was the original 83, and that then ticked off another bit of a sort of a thing that people identified with, which was my audience. I wanted a 25 to 54-year-old chili lover, whether male or female, probably leans a little bit male. And those people lived through the 80s, most of them. And if you're like me, as a 45-year-old guy, the 80s was literally the best decade of all time. Nothing's ever come close to it. And so I really lean into that on the social media and everything like that, in the bottles and all the rest. And I learned through radio, which is if you can connect on an emotional level with something, and whether that's like the Nana thing or the 80s thing or just whatever, I think that's part of it. And then we started talking about the labels, and I wanted them to look like old medicine jars you'd find in your Nana's house. And so all of a sudden, you got all these elements. If you're like me, I go and buy a bottle of wine. I buy it because the label looks cool, which is not a strong method I've discovered. But I thought if I can get people to buy it because it looks cool, and then again, that shit the bed sort of scenario where they buy it because there's something that they're attracted to, but they come back because they love it, I've ticked the box. And so that's what we end up doing. And so we designed it all out, and I got a designer, and he was toiling away. And in the end, me being a bit of a micromanager, I ended up going back to him. I said, look, I love your logo. It's wicked. It's an adapted sort of text of the Dulce's Chilli Cartel, if you see it on the website. But then I said, this is what I want the bottle to look like. And we had a bit of an argument. I said, mate, I'm just paying you to do it. Just do it, mate. And we don't talk anymore, but that's business, I guess. Yeah, and we launched. And so again, like I said to you, ready, fire, aim. I just wanted to get it out there. And I thought, let's tweak it as we go. you're talking about what's in it. Like, it's my personality. The whole brand is me. Like the jokey stuff, like the sitting out. Like I wrote for so many years for Nova and Triple M of essentially comedy or the promos, and came up with ideas. That was what I did at K-Rock, was just ideas and funny and all the rest. And so it really is me. I live and breathe it because it is me. And there's not much half step away from who I am. So yeah, it's something in the end, like I think I said at the start, I didn't start this to become a millionaire or make $100 million, although I do have my price if anyone wants to buy a company making chili oil. But I wanted it to create a brand that I just genuinely love. And I said to the designer guy, mate, I'm the one who has to go out there to shops and bang on their door and say to them, hey, do you want to buy this? I said, if I don't like the label, it makes it really hard. And we launched in December last year. We missed the Christmas market. All my friends and family all jumped on board, bought it at $17.95 plus $10 postage and handling, which is rich, but they all support it. And I had people buying like 10 bottles, and it was so amazing. And I thought they were buying, it was so overwhelming, and it has been overwhelming because I thought they were buying it to be nice, and they probably were at the start. And then people started coming back, like friends started coming back. I've got a mate in Barwon Heads in Ocean Grove who literally, he's one of my biggest buyers. He's bought like probably about 30 jars in the 30 weeks I've been going. I don't know what he's doing with it, but he is such a supporter. And so I know it's good. And that was a real moment of getting through Christmas and launching it and feeling like I was doing something and doing it. It was another thing financially was still pretty, like we only invested 10K, I think, all up. So it wasn't, if it fell over, it wasn't going to kill us. So yeah, got through Christmas, took some time off. I was pretty tired after having 6 months off and then working for a month. Yeah, and then got back into it at the start of the year and was still doing radio, to be honest with you. I still do radio today, just write casually for a couple of a mate, and every now and then I'll do some on-air work for other stations and stuff. So I still do it. It's not for the money. It's just to keep my hand in there. But yeah, and around February, my partner said, hey, the business is going good. Didn't use the great word, but she said, the business is going good. She said, the money, she said, I think you might need to start thinking about a part-time job. And that scared the shit out of me because I didn't really care where I worked, but I thought, I don't want to do a part-time job because this has to work. This has to work. And so I said, what about instead of doing that, I do markets on weekends. And that was probably the biggest, best decision we ever made. I booked into a market around the corner. It was a farmer's market and went there with a brand new marquee and tables, and I had a friend over from Sydney and we went there, and on the way I said, I would love to sell 20 jars in 4 hours. That would have been great. We sold 50 and I was like, fuck, this is good. I do 2 of these, I'm selling 100 a week. And I had all these little goals, and selling 100 a week at the start was huge, like huge. So I booked in a couple of markets and I hit this one market at Woodend, if you live in Melbourne. And I went up there and I took 120 up. And I don't know why I did. I used to just take too many just because it was funny. And I sold 120 in 3 hours. And I rang Penny with about an hour to go, like 2 hours ago, and I said, can you get in the car and bring up another box? I said, I'm going to sell this out. And so I sold out, and then the markets just started getting bigger and bigger. Selling, like this weekend I can sell 200 plus across 8 hours. So all of a sudden it was really propping up the business, which was great. And that gave me a bit more time to just work on the other parts, which is getting stores and getting online right and all that sort of thing. And I'm nowhere near it. But yeah, like again, we're 7 months in at the moment. So it's the wildest journey. If you said 7 months ago, probably doing 300 jars a week at the moment. If you said 7 months ago you were selling 300 jars a week, I would have laughed. Gone through 6,000 jars essentially in 7 months. Got another 6,000 arriving in a week or so from China, empty. So yeah, it's pretty wild. It's grown well beyond what I thought it would. And again, you said before, the question was, what's in it? What of me is in it? It's literally, I feel like people are buying me, like at the markets. Like I sometimes feel I built them over the head with the sales pitch and the story, but they love it and they identify with it. And I feel like sometimes they just buy it to get me to shut up, but then other times they buy it and they come back. Get guys coming back buying 6 jars at a time. It's wild. And the biggest thing I learned from, the markets was just, I did the first one, where people would try it and they'd be like, oh, wow, this is really good. And this is amazing. And then they'd be yelling across the market, you have to come try this chili oil, to their friend. This is the best chili oil I've ever had. And they were the first people that I'd ever seen try it, because no one had tried it except for me. And so when we did the market, like literally they were the first people to try it. And I'm like, ooh, what? This might be big. This might actually be good chili oil. Like I might actually know what I'm doing. Yeah, the markets I love because people froth on it so hard and they make me feel like I've definitely made the right decision.
I interviewed some fantastic humans not too long ago who have a jewelry brand, Bixby and Co. And they talked to me a little bit about the markets as well. And it's something I want to bring up because if you're in a product-based business and you're e-com potentially, e-com's of course the first place we might go to start. What that lacks is that feedback and that ability to look a customer in the eye and let them try whatever product you've created, be it something like a piece of jewelry or a chili oil, and give you immediate feedback, which can be really scary, I imagine. That immediate feedback is priceless. And it sounds like for you, it's had the same effect, that it's enabled you to have confidence in what you're doing and then leap and bound in terms of, okay, cool. People are obviously going to like this. I can get this immediate feedback. I can hear what they like about it. I can see their reaction. I can see the type of people that are enjoying it. I can watch word of mouth happen real time. Like that kind of real time feedback in a business sense is pretty well priceless. So I'm really happy to hear that markets are doing that. And I wanted to bang on and bang home about it because I think anybody who's got a product base and is maybe playing in the e-com space, I think sometimes we can hide behind these things. I know in an audio entertainment or whatever you want to call it, I'm a creator. You put the product out there. I literally don't see anyone listen to it. I can solely rely on reviews and things like that. My ability to be able to get feedback is to hear from people and ask for reviews, but also to just put it out there as much as possible. Senator, can you feature me? Senator, what do you think of this? Senator, do you want to sponsor me? All that sort of stuff. You've got to ask for feedback when you've got a product there. It's really easy to hide behind your brand.
And working in radio, one of the things, the frustrating parts was, so when I was working in Perth, I was the content director and like I knew we sounded great, but we just couldn't rate. And I don't know what it was, but everyone used to say to me, mate, Nova's sounded the best it sounded in 5 years. But ratings-wise, we were dying. And our neighbour was a tradie, and a couple of times he'd go, do you reckon you could come and help me build a wall on the weekend? I'd be like, oh, yeah. And we'd finish. I had a greater sense of accomplishment from building a wall because I could see what it was. Whereas radio, I'd go in and battle each day and I'm like, this is just nothing. And so going back to the markets was so great because you do get instant feedback. A, I'd never seen someone enjoy it before. And B, like I said, I'd be at the Woodend market and people would come around and say, oh, I heard people talking about how this is the greatest chili, or like they were 100 metres away at another stall saying, this is the greatest chili that I have to try it. When I left radio, and I mentioned before, my confidence, I've never had lower confidence in my life. Like I was a shell, and I used to say to my partner, I'm a shell of a human because they had broken me so hard. Like I just didn't enjoy it so badly that I would prefer to quit with nothing to go to than to roll up to a job that was paying 150 grand a year or whatever it was. And I'm like, that's where I was. And so I need to rebuild myself. And the markets have done that. And the people at the markets have also done that. They've just like, people just out there and having a go. You have to get to a point in your life. And I'm super happy for those people who work in the same industry their whole life, love it, and just move on. But I'm pretty self-driven, and I knew this point would come one day. I didn't know what it would look like. I now know what it looks like. But making the leap from having that full-time job into this, and we prefix it with, I could never have done it without a supportive partner and the money that she'd saved, because she's so good with money. We wouldn't have been able to probably do it. I'd still be battling away at Triple M and second-guessing my life and all the rest. But we did it, and I had to pour everything in because we had a lifestyle that we had in Sydney, and I wanted that back. And I wanted her, who trusted me, to build a company, and I wanted her to have that back, to be able to go out and buy whatever she wanted or do that. I wanted her to have that. And so that's why I work so hard every day, because I want her, us, essentially, to be able to do the things we want to do, to go on a holiday and all that. At the end of the day, like I'm very self-driven, or that's the biggest thing I have learned, is to self-drive, because I didn't probably have that before. But when it's putting food in your mouth, you have to make it happen, because if I don't work, we don't get paid. Don't get me wrong, she's got a great corporate job. She's always earned well more than I ever have. Will always earn more than I ever will. But I want to feel like I was contributing. So that's why I work so hard at making this work. So yeah, it's been I've learned so much about myself in 6 months. And the other thing was, I always thought I took a lot of risks. And I always thought I was like super, living on the edge, take risks, and they always work. But you don't know the risk you take until you leave a job with that security and that money and try and start your own business. I think you had anxiety before, but it was a different anxiety. It was the anxiety that I could control, whereas the anxiety when I was working with those guys I couldn't control. It just would pop up in the middle of meetings. And whereas this was like anxiety that I'd wake up with, was Are my 3,000 jars going to arrive from China in time before I run out because I've got orders to do and I've got to get into a kitchen and start filling these bottles? And so I've learned so much and I don't regret it at all. I never at one point regret leaving radio. It's the best thing I ever did, honestly.
Yeah, amen to the feeling of being able to support yourself from something that you've made. There is no greater feeling, and amen to the deepest level of anxiety you will ever experience as part of it. I hear you on that. What's your dream for the product? What's on the dream board? Is there somewhere you want to be in terms of a store? Is there something big that you're working towards?
It was funny because as much as I wrote up those brand values, I wrote up a whole bunch of results-based things, and some of them were numbers. There was a lot of numbers in there, like I wanted to sell 100 jars, 200 jars. I've got a big one, which is 1,000 jars a week. And so we've just come off the best month we've ever had, off the best week we've ever had, and then last weekend was the best weekend I've ever had. So that monetary-wise, tick those boxes. But mine, again, like I said up the front, has never been about the money. One of the goals which got ticked off last week, which I know sounds like the dumbest thing ever, and like people will think it's dumb, but it's not dumb to me, was I wanted to start a business that when I would meet someone at a party and they would say to me, "Oh, you're the guy who runs DC Cartel. Mate, I've tried that and it's the most amazing chili oil ever," in a sense where I've never met this person before. And I was literally at Coles the other day buying oil and a bunch of other ingredients. And this guy was pushing trolleys and he was collecting trolleys. And he said, "Oh, you've got a bit of stuff there." He said, "What are you doing? A bit of cooking?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I run a chili business." He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Man, I love chili." And I said, "Oh, mine's called DC Cartel. It's a chili oil." And he said, "Fuck off." He said, "You're DC Cartel." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Mate, my dad bought your thing at the Coburg market and he went back and he bought 6 more jars and he's given it to all of us kids. We're all fully addicted to it." And he went to not hug me, but to high five me or something like that. And I remember thinking that was one of my little success brand tick boxes sort of thing. And since then, I've had 2 more of people I've never met who literally, not in the market sense, not in anything, in the social sense, who had bought that and didn't know me. And so that was one. They're the sort of little things that I love. When it comes to the big picture, one of the brand values that I wrote was to never be in Coles and Woolies. And I know that sounds really strange, but I just didn't want to sell out. And I don't want to sell out. And everyone's got a price. So if they came along and they're listening, they want to give me $100 million, I'll do it. But I want it to be independent and I want it to have that real, you look at all those cool little breweries that popped up and then they sold to the big guys. I want it to be that real cool thing. I started this for one reason, that was to have what I call mailbox money. And so the mailbox money was literally I would get a check every week of X amount and I didn't have to work for it. And I built this company on my own. And so that's the dream. I'm hoping that check's $1 million a year. But yeah, I don't have a big idea when it comes to it. I'm setting goals and I'm trying to grow it really slow is my biggest thing, but that's proving a lot harder to do than I actually realised. It's so hard to build slow. Like it's growing at such a rate I'm barely keeping up, which I'm comfortable with. As far as the big picture goes, the next one's 1,000 jars a week. And then after that, we're probably talking about the amount of stores. And then after that, it's literally getting to the point where I can just step away and someone can run it and I can just sit across the top of it and do the branding. Because really I started this because I wanted to create a brand that I loved and I wanted to work on a brand that I was proud of. And if it made good chili oil, that was also cool. And if people loved it a lot, which they do, that was even better. And if I made a heap of money from it, that was also pretty cool. So, yeah, again, I keep pinching myself. We're 7 months in and I've sold 6,000 jars in 7 months. And the only reason I didn't order 10,000 the other day was because I don't have anywhere to store 10,000. So it's a pretty cool sort of story. And the fact of you hear about these people, and that's what made me do it when I was I thought, I'm not enjoying my job. Can you see it getting better? No. You hear about these people quitting their jobs and doing something. This is your one opportunity to do it. This is a window where you can have 6 months of your life off, renovate the house and start a business and hopefully make money. And I just did it because it was low risk and it worked. And I run into so many people at markets who are like, man, I tell them that story and they're like, oh, I'm a nurse and I'd love to do walking tours. I love walking tours. I said, what's stopping you? Nursing's never going to go anywhere. No, nursing's going to be there in 10, 100 years. Just give it a go because you'll regret it. You'll honestly regret not doing what you want to do. Like I always used to think, what's my plan B? Outside of radio, what's my plan B? And when we had that conversation, I was like, hang on, what's my plan A? I can always do radio. Radio is going to be there for a while. But what do I love doing? And what can I then try and make money out of? And so what's my plan A? And yeah, turns out at the moment it's chili oil. It's going pretty good.
I really like that approach. We often call these things side hustles or side gigs or just building something up. But yeah, why not just turn that on the head and be like, what's going to be my main gig that I build myself? And then I know I've got this backup plan. I think that's a great way to do it. And you have shared so much great insight today. I love hearing about the stories of people just going for it and creating a thing that didn't exist and then making it a real product. And thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your journey so intimately and all of the ups and downs that are to come and all the exciting things that are coming. It's just brilliant. The last question that I always ask my fabulous business building guests is, how can the listener and I support you to go on to your next stage?
It's probably just liking my Instagram page. If you find it funny, just liking that and sharing it. That's honestly where it's at. If you bought a bottle, awesome. And if you talk about it, even better. Like that on the base sense is what I would love. But like going back to it being about other people is like, just get out and like you hear about people who start businesses. And like I said, my mates bought it and I thought they were just doing it to be nice. And they came back and rebought it because they obviously liked it. It's just like when you hear about businesses who are starting, and if you can afford to do it, just support them. Because honestly, those people are, and like I was the exact proof is, like I would wake up in the middle of the night saying, mate, what do you know about chili oil? You don't know anything. Just so much self-doubt. And the people that have messaged me and emailed me and said that yours is the best chili oil I've ever tasted, they were the guys who got me through the darkest of times. Just support someone who's starting because it's fucking hard. It's so soul destroying that while on the outside they may look like they've got their shit together, they've got so much self-doubt. If they're anything like me, and I find myself that I'm actually quite a confident person. So yeah, just look after people pretty much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're all about getting around each other, pumping each other up, even if it's, like you said, a product that you don't necessarily want to buy yourself that you see your friend doing. Just share it on Instagram. Then people think often I won't even share it to my Instagram because like it's my personal page filled with dogs and babies. And why would I share this? No, it matters. There's potentially 300 people there that some and half of which could become customers. So I couldn't be a bigger advocate for get around your small business owning friends and share whatever it is they're doing, even if it's not relevant to you. It doesn't have to be about virtue signaling. It's just about helping someone find customers. So I agree.
And if you can buy it, even better. Do you know what I mean? If you can, I've had so many mates start their business, and if you go in and buy it, I didn't realize how much it meant until I started my business. And that's the only piece of advice is if you see someone starting a business and you can help them with that or a share, just do it. Because, oh my God, it meant the world to me in the early days of self-doubt. And there was lots of that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Leigh, thank you so much for sharing with me today. I'm going to make sure to have all of the links in the show notes so that the listener can go get around it, give it a follow, share, purchase, all of the things. It has been a pleasure to hear your story today. Thank you for spending the time with me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the podcast for small business builders with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review. And of course, join the community on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid wherever you're hanging out, and I'll see you there.